should be live on the YouTube channel.
Okay. Ready? Okay.
We're connected. Yep.
All right. Good morning. My name's Jill Flessing. I serve as the chair of the Addiction Counselor Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Jacqueline Lightcap.
Here.
Christina Boyd. Lisa Carter.
Here.
Jason Hess. Chad Jacobs.
Here.
Michael James. I know Mike's there.
Here. Sorry.
Okay. Charity Cosson. Dulcinea Rakestraw. And Zenova Williams. I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye and Leslie Allen. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Jill. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting, as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other electronic media, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is conducted through interactive communication to allow members of the public without cost to attend the conference call through the use of the YouTube channel as well as the conference call. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of COMA are not suspended, and we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. On February 16th, 2024, we sent notice to the advisory committee to all individuals who had requested notice of such meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website, and they are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line "Request for the agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting is available, will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I did check it before we got started today, and there's no one currently on the conference call line.
Okay. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda. Okay, so it is my understanding that we do not have enough members present to have a quorum.
And actually, Jill, I just saw Christina Boyd is entering.
Okay.
So once she is present, then we will have 6 members, and that should be quorum.
Okay. All right. Looks like Christina is in the meeting. Great. All right. Oops. The first item on the agenda is agenda approval, and we have a quorum. The agenda was forwarded to you by email by David earlier in the week. If there are no additions or changes to the agenda, I'd ask for a motion to approve the agenda for today.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay. All committee members present who approve of the agenda say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. The agenda has been approved. The second item on the agenda is a change in advisory committee membership. David, as I have not met Shane Hudson, could you speak a little bit to his resignation from the committee?
Sure. I was contacted by Shane Hudson. He's been a member of the advisory committee he mentioned that he was going to be moving out of state. I believe it was to Colorado. And he said he appreciated his time on the advisory committee, but it was going to be very challenging logistically to go ahead and juggle that with his new position and moving out of state. So wanted to thank him for his service on the committee, but also let you know that he decided to go ahead and step out of his position before his term ended.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is review and approval of the minutes from the previous meeting, which was in October of 2023. That document was also included in the email provided or sent by David earlier in the week. If there are no changes or additions to those meeting minutes, I'd ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
A motion to approve.
I'll second.
There's been a motion and a second. I'd ask that committee members who agree with approval of the minutes from the previous meeting say aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed, same sign. And the meeting minutes have been approved. The next item on the agenda is the executive director's report. David?
All right, thank you, Jill. I'll go ahead and start with some agency operations, and then we'll talk about some legislative updates, and then a few items from the past board meeting on March 11th, earlier this month. So we are preparing to have an increase in applicants as individuals are approaching their graduation. So very excited for those individuals finishing the end of their school and looking at becoming licensed professionals. And so we've already started to see an increase in applications from some of the professions that can apply early before the degree has posted, but we expect that to continue here for the next couple months. Speaking of schools, we are continuing to provide outreach to students at schools before they graduate. The assistant director, Leslie Allen, and I, we go and attend, we set up informational presentations to schools across the state that have profession or classes and degrees in the professions that we regulate. And so some of those meetings we hold by Zoom, and we talk about the licensure process and try to clarify any kind of confusion or questions individuals have about how to apply for license, how to avoid issues that could potentially cause a longer time period for them when they're applying, and just kind of to walk them through that process a little more clean. And then we also talk about their responsibilities as a professional. And when someone applies for licensure, they are subject to the board's unprofessional conduct regulations, but their entire professional career, they're also subject to those responsibilities as well. And it's an opportunity for us to talk about those unprofessional conduct regulations and make them aware of some of the areas where some individuals struggle, and sometimes because of an action, and sometimes because of maybe needing to understand the rules a little bit more clear. And so we try to kind of stress what resources we offer on the BSRB website, including all the statutes for the profession, the regulations, and then also connect them with the individual staff members they might be working with when they apply for licensure, or if they have a complaint followed against them. It's also an opportunity for us to clarify a little bit of our jurisdiction compared to the other different entities out there. Sometimes when people apply or they submit a complaint against a practitioner, they have some confusion about, do you take the place of law enforcement, or is this something where I submit a complaint and then you're going to act on my behalf? And it gives us an opportunity to really clarify our role acting on behalf of the state for an administrative purpose, and how this has to go towards the person's responsibility with their professional license. So we get a lot of positive feedback from these presentations, and in the earlier stages of the pandemic, all of those had to be basically by Zoom. But just recently this week, I was able to attend a social work gathering at Newman University in Wichita. And we've been able to make it out to Friends University in Kansas City earlier this year, done some other presentations at different locations, but really find these meetings valuable, and just trying to be preemptive and proactive in terms of helping people understand those requirements. Another upcoming item in terms of operations for the BSRB I wanted to make you aware of, we have been having some meetings recently with a company called Granicus. The state of Kansas is in the process of helping state agencies change their website. There's a new agreement with Granicus. And so you may have already seen some other state agencies have a new look to their website. And here in probably the next month or two, the BSRB website will look quite a bit different, at least the front page. And so some of these changes we're really excited about. It'll be nicer for individuals accessing the website from their mobile phones. We're trying to kind of point people in the right direction when they come to the website so they can find the resources they need as quickly as possible. So we are in the process of switching over from our existing website to the new Granicus website. The address won't change at all, so people will still go to the same place. So any existing forms, nothing needs to be updated there, but we're trying to give people an early notice, and we will probably send something out as well so that people, when they come to our website with the new look, they won't think it's a different website. Moving to some legislative updates. I wanted to let you know, so every year the budget for the BSRB as a state agency goes before the House and the Senate chambers separately. There's actually a separate committee on each side that reviews the agency's budget request and makes recommendations. And then those committee recommendations are forwarded to either the House Appropriations Committee on the House side or the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee on the Senate side. And then both the House and the Senate put together separate appropriations bills, and then they pass those on their floor and then come together and resolve items of difference. And that combined appropriations bill is what gets passed by the legislature and sent to the governor. On this year, both the House and the Senate passed the BSRB budget bill out of those committees with no adjustments to the dollar amount. Now, we don't receive any money from the state. We receive that through the license fees that we collect. And by statute, we contribute 10% of all of our revenue back to the state. But we are held to an expenditure limitation by the legislature every year. So that's what they were reviewing, our limitation for this current year, fiscal year 24, and also our fiscal year 25 expenditures. And so when the Senate reviewed those numbers, they were presented with information, and they were very appreciative of the work that we have done. It was noted that over the last 4 years, the ending balance in the BSRB fee fund has decreased, and that is by design. Back in 2019, the board did lower license fees, a lot of application fees and renewal fees for the profession. Most of those were about $50 decreases, and that was to draw down the balance in the BSRB fee fund over time. And so that is currently happening. I think we reached about a high of 2.3 million back in 2019, and currently where we sit is about 1.9 million. So the amount is going down. Our yearly expenditures are about 1.1 to 1.2 million. And so that is the current path that we are on. So the Senate committee expressed appreciation for that, wanted to make sure that ultimately we would have the authority to balance our fees when we needed to do that. And we assured them that we did have that authority within the regulation. On the House side, they noted that the fee fund balance was still higher than our yearly amount of expenditures. And so they requested a report back on ways to have the board examine further ways to lower fees and then to consider doing such. And so we met with the board, had a special board meeting in response to that recommendation by the House Budget Committee, presented some information to the board as far as the history of the fee fund balance, history of the fee changes, and then also our efforts to collect comparable fee information from other states. But with the short period of time, we weren't able to provide all that information to the board. So what the board decided to do at that February board meeting was to make a motion to lower fees for renewals for assistant behavior analysts and behavior analysts. Back when those changes were made, those two groups of professionals were not included. And so one of the recommendations was to go ahead and make similar fee decreases so that those would affect all those different categories. And then also the board in the report noted that it wanted to compare our fees to those in other states and consider that information before making further recommended fee decreases. And so also there was a number of different moving pieces. Lots of state compacts we've joined recently, and we don't fully know the impact and how that's going to affect our revenues. So what the board determined to do was to move forward on the fee decreases for the behavior analyst profession right now, and then collect additional information and revisit the topic of examining fees in the July board meeting, and then also the September board meeting prior to the agency submitting the new budget request for the next fiscal year. So that is currently where we stand. We submitted that report. I got a lot of positive feedback from the chair of that budget committee when I returned it to him. And he actually asked if it would be okay to share that report with the chair of House Appropriations, and I said, absolutely, So that information is out there. And we want to be responsible to the budget committee. We also want to be, in good standing compared to the fees in other states too. So this will allow us time to collect that information and have the board make really well-informed decisions. Now, where we're standing with the overall budget for the state of Kansas, as I mentioned, the House and Senate passed their budget bills separately, and then ultimately they come together to resolve items of difference. That's where we're at right now. The House and the Senate have both passed their budget bills. They are in a period of time to where groups called conference committees meet. And what a conference committee is when you have essentially the same bill passed by both chambers with items of difference. The top three individuals from the House committee and the top three individuals from the Senate committee come together, usually leadership, like the chair, the vice chair, and ranking minority member. Those individuals come together as a 6-member conference committee, and then they discuss items of difference. Sometimes with the appropriations bill, they will make proposals back and forth and take turns doing that until they reach consensus opinions on all those items. That will get summarized into one consensus appropriations bill and then sent back to each chamber's floor to vote on it. And so they are currently in the time period where they're making offers back and forth. I expect that to be wrapped up sometime next week. And then at the end of next week or sometime in the middle of next week, I expect that to go to the chamber floors and they can vote on it. Following next week, I expect the legislature to likely take their traditional 3-week break. Then they come back for the very end of session called omnibus. And the reason they come back for that time period is there's a big push right now with legislature passing a lot of bills. Then they give the governor the 3 weeks to review the legislation, determine if the governor wants to veto any items, and then the legislature can come back and consider, do we want to try to override any vetoes? Additionally, during that 3 weeks, groups meet to get new numbers on consensus revenue estimates, mandatory human service caseload expenditures, to see what needs to be added in terms of those numbers. And then sometimes there's a final effort to push, pass a tax bill or do sort of a cleanup appropriations bill called the omnibus bill. So that's kind of what we're looking at now. But the majority of the work of the legislature has been completed this year. We're just kind of you're getting close to that. So in terms of another item, I want to make you aware of 2 specific bills that have gone through the legislature this year. The first is House Bill 2484, which is a multi-state compact for the social work profession. And the BSRB has been one of the main proponents of that bill. That is a bill that would basically do something innovative that none of the other multi-state compacts currently do. It would establish the ability for states to offer a multi-state license. So currently right now, if you want to practice in Kansas, you get a license in Kansas. If you want to practice in Missouri, similarly. And so what this has led to is individuals having to essentially collect licenses and then having to meet all of those continuing education responsibilities in all the different states. And that has been a difficult thing for a lot of individuals to do, but they have been doing it, some of them for many years. And so this presents an alternative. This compact, once it is up and fully operational, it will create a way for states to offer this multi-state license, and then individuals who live in a particular state will either continue with their existing license with no change, and that will still let them practice in their home state, or they could move to this multi-state license, and then they could practice in all the other states that have joined the compact at no additional cost, and they would not have to meet the continuing education requirements of all those states, just the state where they live. So really, really helpful thing for licensees. One of the other aspects has to do with telehealth practice. Some individuals travel and they have talked about when they go to certain places for vacation, or maybe if they're going to do a sabbatical at a certain place, then they want to be able to continue to provide services. This way, they would be able to do that as long as the states they were traveling between were all compact states. Additionally, we have heard from individuals that it's not so much about the licensee mobility, it's about the mobility of the client. We've heard from some individuals that say, if we're working with someone and then that person chooses to go out of state to college, I'd like to continue to work with them, they're my client. But right now, the only way you could do that is to get authority in each particular state where you would need to provide services. Under this model, as long as those are all compact states, you would be able to provide better continuity of care. So So we're really happy about this bill moving forward. It has passed through the House chamber. It has also passed through the Senate chamber now, and so it will be sent to the governor, and I fully expect the governor to sign this sometime soon. The only negative thing is that when we initially were considering this bill, the BSRB, the board has been completely supportive of the compact. However, this will change the way that licensure works for social workers in Kansas. Currently, right now, we have about 8,288 individuals licensed in social work in Kansas. But of that amount, 22% of our social work licensees live outside of the state of Kansas. They are individuals that previously decided they would like to have a license in Kansas, even though they don't live within the state. Well, under this model, it would make much more sense for those individuals to get a multi-state license in the state where they live, rather than continue to get a license in Kansas. So we expect those 1,800 people will likely drop off of our license rolls. So I've been trying to preempt people. When you look at our license totals and the history of the growth in the social work profession, at some point, those license numbers are going to go down very quickly. It doesn't mean fewer people are providing services, but it does mean we're going to change the way that we're looking at things like workforce when we look at licensees. And it will also mean that the license renewal revenue that we have collected for those individuals, we expect that to also go away because they will be doing a multi-state license in their home state, so they will no longer be contributing to the operating costs of the BSRB. And so that means we expect to see a decrease in revenue of about $150,000 every 2 years, given how many people are part of that group. Now, the way to mitigate that cost that the compact anticipated is to be able to charge more for a multi-state license. And it would make sense. If you're practicing in one state, you could pay one amount. And if you're now having the opportunity to do telehealth or practice in all these different states, it would make sense that you'd be practicing at a higher amount and paying more for a multi-state license. So there has been some discussion about what the appropriate amount should be for that. The original draft of the bill included a fee cap for those different levels of multi-state license and would have allowed the board to look to see, okay, where should the amount be set within that cap? But then that was adjusted in the House Budget Committee. And instead of including that overall cap per level of multi-state license, they essentially removed that language and they put in the ability for the BSRB to charge up to $25 for something they called the ability to privilege to practice under this multi-state compact. And based on the numbers that we have run and the survey we did of social workers to see how many would want to move under the compact, that $25 amount doesn't really cover the estimated loss in revenue. Even if the numbers hold true and everybody who indicated they would want to move over, even if those percentages do move over, it's estimated that would come to about $100,000 in revenue, still leading to about a decrease of $50,000 every 2 years. So we know that there's other states that have passed this compact that have not tried to address the issue proactively in terms of fees. We currently don't know how much it'll cost the state of Kansas to be a member of the compact. As an example, the Board of Nursing, when they joined the multi-state compact for nursing, that also has a multi-state license, and the decision was made by their commission to charge each state a set cost. And I don't know if that's $4,000 or $6,000, but if that's what is determined in this case, that would be another cost for us to absorb. So there are some logistics to work through. There's also what you've seen in other compacts, a requirement for a background check to be practicing under these compacts as well. So that is something we'll be having to work with KBI to figure out the logistics for. But I don't want that to get lost. There's a lot of details, and I'm a detail-oriented person, so I'm trying to make the board aware of these things and try to keep everybody in the loop. But I don't want to confuse the issue. The board is very much supportive of the compact and very excited about the compact being so close to passing. In terms of the time frame, though, for when it will be operational, based on the other compacts, I honestly don't know. I think it would be we would be hopeful that maybe it could be operational in a year if they're able to do a data center to keep track of all the individuals that have the ability to practice under a multi-state license, and some other things to work through logistically with that commission once it can start meeting. But I think maybe that's about a good target to look for when that compact could be operational. But I may be jumping ahead because the bill hasn't officially been signed into law yet, but I fully expect that to be announced sometime in the next few weeks. The other bill I wanted to talk about briefly is Senate Bill 307, and that has to do with the Kansas Fights Addiction Act. You may have heard about the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board that was started a few years back. Senate Bill 307 makes a change to that bill to add for-profit entities to the definition of qualified applicants, and that has passed both chambers. It was presented to the governor back on March 19th, and it was approved by the governor on Friday, March 22nd. So I believe that is likely to have an implementation date of around July 1st, but basically that is something that has also passed that was kind of relevant to individuals for this profession. And then one other item in terms of legislative update, we are currently in the process of moving forward on some proposed changes to regulations. We've talked about those over the last year. Basically, that process can be kind of lengthy, unfortunately, in terms of getting all the approvals once agencies decide to move forward and change some of those regulations. But for your profession, some of those items that are moving through that process now has to do with one of your regulations that would add the national accrediting body for educational purposes, for licensure for addiction counseling, also some of the terminology changes for the specific coursework for requirements for individuals when they're moving through that process and attempting to qualify for an addiction counseling license. The process, once you get approval from the Department of Administration and the Attorney General's office, is you have to publish notice that there would be a period of time of 60 days for public comment, and then you would hold a public meeting at the conclusion of those 60 days. So that did just occur on Tuesday of this past week on March 26th here at the board office. We didn't have any additional public comment during that time, but the next step now will be for us to work with the Attorney General's office to see if we can resolve a concern that the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations had when they reviewed these regulations. Their main concern was that there were two new terms that have been added to the regulation. One dealt with the topic of in residence that we have talked about before for individuals going through certain application processes. There can be requirements that they attend certain classes in residence, which traditionally has meant physically at the school. Now the new language would say you can meet that requirement either physically at the school or by synchronous video conferencing, so face-to-face over screen, but there needs to be that real-time component to it. The term synchronous was a term that they wanted us to add a little more detail to in the regulation. So I believe that's just a natural extension of the regulation, not a big fundamental change, but we'll talk to the Attorney General's office to clarify that and see if we can add in a couple more words just to help individuals understand that phrase. And then the other had to do with adding the term biopsychosocial for your education regulation, and they expressed some confusion at that term. And I am hopeful that perhaps just adding an additional phrase that would say the biological, psychological, and social well-being of the person, or something, simple to that effect, but basically just a simple definition that doesn't involve a real substantial change to the regulation. If you have to add really substantial changes, it can cause the 60-day time clock to restart. And unfortunately, that can mean individuals that could be helped by these regulations would have to wait longer. We don't want to do that, but we want to be responsive to the committee. So right now we'll have to work with the Attorney General's office and see if we can reach an understanding to be able to have the board vote on these regulations. But as long as we can do that, the next step would be for the board to do a roll call vote to permanently adopt these regulations. And that could happen at the next board meeting in May, on May 13th. So I have some updates from the last board meeting, but I'll go ahead and pause here and see if there's any questions about those legislative items that I talked about.
David, I just had a quick question about the interstate compact. How many states are currently in that?
I believe there are 5. As of last year, only one had passed it, but the language was finalized late in February or at the very beginning of March. So most of the legislatures had already kind of wrapped up most of their work last year when it was put out. So last year, Missouri passed it at the very tail end of their session. And then this year, there's about 26 states that are considering it. So the last that I heard, there was about 5 that have already passed it. But I fully expect, I think there has to be either 7 or 9 for the Compact Commission to start meeting. So I believe it's almost certain that by the end of this session, enough will meet enough states will pass it to be able to start having the compact commission meet, start to work on the rules for the commission. But I think it is very likely that we will probably have within at least a couple of years, probably close to about 35 to maybe 40 states that pass the compact. I've seen similar numbers for the psychology compact, and professional counseling has got a lot of response as well. I think their numbers might be around 35 or 38. But yeah, I think at least, if not all this year, probably next year, you will see a big push. And so we'll see a lot of states join that compact. Well, if there's no more questions on legislative items, let's move to a couple items from the past board meeting. The board did meet on March 11th. We are trying to finalize an agreement with a company called CE Broker. So this is something also that you'll be seeing here probably later this year. Basically, the idea behind this is that this is a company that partners with state agencies in several different states, and now has partnered with the Board of Healing Arts and the Board of Nursing as a way to assist individuals in tracking your continuing education hours and maintaining your documentation should you get audited and need to show and demonstrate that you did complete those hours. So what this company would do is it would offer a free service to all of our licensees to sign up for an account, and there'd be no charge to the BSRB as well. And this would allow those individuals to upload documentation and categorize it a certain way. So when you complete a CE, instead of just hanging on to that documentation and then not knowing if you're going to get pulled for audit or not, you could have an option to go ahead and upload it to that portal, and then it would be available there. And then if you are selected for audit at the time of renewal, the BSRB can go in there, verify that you do have the correct documentation, that you completed those hours, and then the audit process should go much more smoothly and much quicker as well. It's an optional process. Nobody needs to sign up for it. The way the company makes money is they have some additional services that people can sign up for at a paid cost. But the way that the states generally operate is that you make this free service available. That way there's no cost to the state licensing board or the individuals, but enough people voluntarily opt in for the other services that it makes it a profitable thing for the company as well. So kind of a good partnership that we're looking forward at moving into as well, but that'll be something coming up probably later this year. Additionally, the board talked about the topic of background checks for licensees. We did receive authority to require background checks for all licensees back in 2016, but that has not been something the board has made mandatory as a condition of licensure for different professions. But with these multi-state compacts, it is a requirement. So for us to stay in compliance with those compacts, and for some of the compacts, just to have individuals practice from the beginning, they will still need to have a background check as part of the state licensure requirements. So the board is looking at whether to make this a requirement for just the individuals under the compacts that will need to practice with those, or to take a broader approach and say maybe this is the time to require it for all levels of license. From what I understand, in other states, a lot of the professions already require it, though we currently do not. The money that would be collected as part of these background checks that would not go to operations of the BSRB. It would be purely for KBI to run these and then make it available to us. And the board did look to see, they know that some individuals already have these background checks as a part of employment or other requirements. Could there be some sort of a sharing of information? But fortunately, no, that is illegal. So we don't want to run into any issues there. But we want to be responsive to their requirements under the compacts. And so that's something we'll be working on, and the board will have further discussion on. The board also received a presentation by a company called Acela. There was a bill that passed the legislature last year that was focused on trying to develop a unified license verification portal for the state, so that if you were looking to see is someone licensed by this state, you could go to this one website and look to see, okay, is this person licensed in Kansas, whether that's as someone who's an architect or someone who's an addiction counselor. And as part of that process, the bill also included the ability for the state to work with one company to develop licensing systems as sort of an enterprise licensing vendor for the state. This wouldn't make it mandatory for agencies, but if they wanted to opt into this new system, they could under this existing agreement. And so currently right now, about 5 or 6 agencies have already opted in. These are similar to the BSRB, they're fee-funded agencies. And the board received a presentation by that group, Acela, at the last board meeting to see if maybe this would be a good idea for the BSRB as well. So the board is going to be thinking about that and probably have further discussion on that topic when they come back. Some of the benefits that I can see for that company, some of the resources they offer are more of an integrated approach. A lot of the things that we do here in our office, we do have the tools necessary to do the licensing process, but a lot of it, we have separate pieces. And so our staff have to connect a lot of those things together. And I think what this would present would be a way for us to integrate a lot more of those things. So there would be less need to basically connect a payment to someone after they've submitted application materials by mailing them in. There would also probably be an easier way for us to set up an online application so people could apply for licensure, pay the fee at that time, and then it would all be there in the system versus us having to manually enter some of that information or connect the pieces later. So I do see a benefit to it, but there are always pros and cons when you're considering these types of decisions. So something for the board to think about and have more discussion on. In terms of another item from the board meeting, the board passed a delegation motion for BSRB licensing staff. So there are some rare cases when an individual applies for licensure where practicum references are unavailable. And these generally happen because of cases where it's been several years since it's occurred, and perhaps the person who provided the original reference is deceased and not available, or the school cannot locate that person because it's been several years since that occurred. And what we have done in the past is we have brought these cases to the board to see if the board is agreement to move forward with an exception for these individuals. And the board has in general supported moving forward. However, we've still been holding these for the official board vote, and the board meets once a month for these closed meetings. And so this delegation motion basically provided direction to staff of the BSRB to be able to move these ones forward without having to be held and have the full board review these. So should speed up the time frame for the handful of individuals that fall into that category. And then the board started a discussion on possibly requiring a jurisprudence examination for different professions. If you're not familiar with jurisprudence examinations, for some of the other professions in different states, especially, there can be a requirement that, especially when individuals come from out of state, they have to take an examination to show that they understand the state specific laws or some of the requirements of licensure. And so it can deal with unprofessional conduct. It can also involve some other responsibilities as a licensee. So these jurisprudence examinations, some states find them really valuable. And so the BSRB wanted to start to have a conversation on these to see if these would be of value, and then possibly explore ways that these could be implemented in Kansas. And then every year the board holds an all-day planning meeting. They try to move this meeting around the state, but they meet together and then work through items that would require further discussion or more, lengthy analysis. And so 2 years ago, this meeting was in Kansas City. Last year, it was in Wichita. This year, the board has decided to meet, and we were able to just recently identify the date for that. It is going to be on Monday, September 30th, 2024. We don't have the location determined yet, but I will be contacting and exploring some different options and hope to have information for the board sometime soon. But we do know that that all-day meeting will be on Monday, September 30th this year. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions on those items.
Okay. If there aren't any questions, thank you, David. The next item on the agenda is old business, and it is a continued discussion of alternate licensure reciprocity process based on years of service in lieu of meeting other licensure requirements. I know we had talked about this at the last committee meeting, and I wanted to open the discussion to see if anyone had further thoughts or ideas about a consistent way to make this happen. I know we had talked about people that are moving into the state that have years and years of addiction counseling experience, but may not meet the current licensure requirements, and that seems like a loss to the profession.
Jill, I don't remember a whole lot of our conversation, honestly. So did we talk a little bit about maybe, using the exam component as just a way to kind of check it?
We had.
Okay. Because I know that's when I've looked at other states, not for the addiction side, but for other licenses, that's usually one piece that they ask for that vision of doing the reciprocity component. The only challenge would be, I guess, I guess if they're applying, we can get access to that test, because I've had a few that I'm like, well, I can't access the next level because Missouri doesn't use that one. So I'm not sure what else we could do, because I don't know that just sheer years of experience would be. I think I'd want something a little bit more just to check the knowledge base. I don't know.
Do others have thoughts?
So, Mike, are you thinking the exam would be in addition to providing, assuming they're staying current with their license, so they would have had continuing ed? Are you
Right.
saying I'm doing the exam? I'm looking at our old notes and it said we had talked about having an exam and educational requirements. So another exam if they have already had one earlier in their career?
Do any of you guys know, does the ICRC have multiple levels of test, or is it just one?
I don't know. I'd have to look at their website.
Yeah, that's the only piece, because like the Kansas picks the level 2, right, for the LAC from the NADAC side of the house.
Mhm.
But if we have a state that is picking a lower level test from ICRC and we're trying to make them equivalent, does that make sense?
Yeah, you're saying they could have tested at a lower level.
Right. They could have tested
And
at a lower
then-
level and then, not necessarily get what we're asking for, or I mean, we're trying to make sure it's as equal as we can get, but maybe not necessarily asking to them to have the degrees and the, 4 years of worth of work that Kansas requires that other states do not, but they may have the equivalent knowledge base. So, right. That makes sense. And
Mhm.
like I said, I don't remember if ICRC has multiple levels on their test, because if they have multiple levels, then it makes sense.
Yes, they do have. This is
Okay.
Leslie. They do have multiple levels.
Okay. And I know ICRC and NADAC are coming closer and closer together all the time, but it's, that's a process that takes years.
I think too, and I'm also trying to remember what all was discussed. I'm thinking of, other states that I've like Colorado. There was like kind of this when they did this with social work too. There was a shift. There was a time period there where there was a little bit of growing pains, I guess. But also again maintaining. I mean, I think about individuals that maybe entered the field, like how much research and advancement there's been in our knowledge base, and again that need to have that insured. And I don't know how we ensure that, like other states, or like with the CU requirements, with again just that knowledge. I would be highly supportive of taking a test to show competence kind of in that area, I guess, of knowledge base. And I mean, to be quite frank, I think also in just our attitudes of, how we approach treatment has changed, right? It's changed since I started school, way back. And so I think just expressing caution, that I think in some ways, Kansas, it's a good thing that we hold a standard. And that is, again, our main goal is to provide for the safety of those participants, right? We want to make sure people are competent to provide care. And so I just think that we have to weigh that with the need to also look at the workforce issues. And we want people to have, the least amount of barriers to providing good care if they're, clinicians. And we have to balance that with, we need to make sure that the clinicians entering our field in our state are have that knowledge and attitude and, you know, all of those skills necessary to provide that treatment. So
What's the latest with testing? You know, I myself haven't had to take a test in over 20 years. Are the tests keeping up with the technology of the field? Would we be able to gauge that someone knew that with the current test?
that's a great question, Lisa. And I think also, I mean, in other professions, we're also looking at standardized testing and how that may or may not be equitable.
I'm just thinking that if there are certain things that we would want someone to know, how could we ensure they get that outside of a test? Like, is it a core? I'm just brainstorming. Is it a course that we require? Is it a series of courses that we require? I don't know.
You know, and if we go course right direction, then we're going, is it, you know, can they do it through a continuing education kind of component, or does it have to actually be
Yeah.
credit courses?
And are the classes different or are they equivalent across different universities or colleges?
It becomes pretty messy.
Also, I have a question. This is Leslie. If you use the test, if someone's already passed the test 20 years ago, are you going to make them take the NCAC2 again to show that they have current knowledge? Or because now we accept scores no matter how long ago they took the exam. So if they've already taken the exam, would we accept the score from that long ago, or would you want them to test again?
Leslie, is that consistent across the different fields?
About accepting the
testing
exam?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, I figured it probably was just because the LCPC thing.
Addressing the public safety aspect and the consumer protection, should we be looking more at, can they pass a background check? Do they have references that they've obtained from someone within a certain recent time period, you know, 3 to 5 years? Should we be maybe looking more at that as opposed to what tests they may have taken however long ago it was? Do we look at resumes to see what in what capacity they've been working? You know, because that would give us an idea about technology that they have access to, treatment models, evidence-based practices, etc. Or we create something for them to fill out that addresses those areas.
I know some other states do, you know, you have to practice X number of hours within this time frame, within the last 5 years, within the last 10 years, that kind of stuff. I don't know how limiting that might be, you know, just thinking from, you know, personal perspective, that's relatively limited because I practice this much now that I'm more in education. So it could make it hard for reciprocity for me on some, you know, some states just because that's not been what I've been doing, but if I changed over, but that might be a somewhat more of an anomaly than if somebody's actually coming in. And having had students that have tried to come here to attempt to get the Kansas license, and when they walk away from and say they're not going to do it, it usually is because they have to get a degree and they've been working for 20 years and they're still working, but they're just have to move to Kansas for, you know, military, husband's job, wife's job, something. So I don't know. I mean,
So currently, there is a Kansas law that would allow someone who is a resident of Kansas or becoming a resident or is a Kansas military or military spouse coming to Kansas. That law would allow them to get licensed currently and not have the specific degree in education.
right.
So
I think
this would only affect those that are like doing telehealth from other states coming,
or non-military,
you know, treating Kansas clients, right?
Or I suppose it could also affect people that live in border cities that maybe want to live in Kansas City, Missouri, but practice in Kansas City, Kansas, for example.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
So I won't have to pay for 3 licenses instead of 2.
I mean, that's my
4.
situation. I live in Kansas and technically work in Missouri.
Yeah, be licensed in both. So
Okay.
how does it also other states, I'm wondering, like other states, again, they're just the it's not uniform at all as far as even licensure versus certification. Some states, how that would be, I don't know. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around this a little bit more. I guess that plays in. I have questions about that too. Like some states have a licensure, which requires a higher level, probably a different level of of requirements versus certification.
Mm.
And then how that's looked at.
So
I
for
think,
reciprocity, we look at certification and allow that towards getting a license in Kansas. We do accept states that are certified rather than licensed.
okay.
Many more states are ICNRC than NADAC, and we use NADAC. So we're kind of the outlier, I think. And so I don't know that much about ICNRC credentialing. There's many levels, high school, through master's degrees, but I don't know that much about them.
So that kind of, I think that's very helpful, Leslie. And also then again, that idea of the different levels of licensure for the test, right? Like, because it'd be helpful to know, like NADAC, we say you have to have this level of test. Where is that level of testing, showing proficiency on the other? Do we know where that would be kind of consistent?
Yes, we do. We accept the ADC, which is the lower test for ICNRC, for the LAC in lieu of the NCAC2, and then we accept the AADC for master's or clinical level.
Okay. So that's currently. So I guess I go back to what are we talking about changing that? Like what is the difference of what we're discussing now versus what is currently? I don't know if that can be clarified.
That's the bachelor's degree component, right?
That was my understanding, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you don't have to have the bachelor's to get the ADC on the ICRC side. The AADC, I think there's a little bit of variation there. I'd have to get back in and look at a couple of the specific states. Because I know Missouri, I think that one is, I'm not going to say that because I don't know for sure. And to speak a little bit to your comment about standardized tests, in academia, we've seen that move away from academic testing to get into school. And recently I've started to see, wait, we got to go back to this because what we were doing isn't working. So I would assume, that same kind of thing's probably going to happen with the testing for professions. It's some type of measure, it gives us something, and doing it qualitatively is just not efficient or be able to kind of really do it really well. It's that's at least the move that seems to be going, but I don't know where it would be on the professional license side. That makes sense, Christina?
Yeah, I think I'm more referencing like for social work, just the there's been a lot of questions about racial inequities in the test taking with the standardized test currently, and not so much. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. There's just been a lot of debate about that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we have a lot of questions. Is there any unified recommendation we would give to the board on this?
Did we identify like a number of years of experience that we'd want to see? Is there a cutoff for that? I don't recall that being part of our conversation, but that doesn't mean we didn't do it.
Is that something that is looked at it for reciprocity in other disciplines, years of experience, or is this unique to addictions counseling because of the degree component? Or not,
In the other professions, they all have to have the degree.
the degree?
They have to have a bachelor's, master's, or doctorate, depending on what they're applying for. So this would be unique to addiction counseling.
So again, I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit here, but I just wonder why, when we look at individuals who have a substance use disorder, that we say, okay, you have to have these things to treat, and other individuals for mental health, for nursing, whatever. Why is it different for those individuals that we're saying need this care and treatment? Is there, I guess I would want the same, like looking at again the same
rigor.
standard, same rigor. Yeah, that's a great way to put that, Jill. I know again that this is a workforce issue, and there's workforce issues with everything, and across the board right now. I would hate to compromise, and I don't know if that is compromising, right? Like, I mean, I'm in academia. I also understand that the people can be very qualified and have amazing skills and knowledge, and it doesn't always have to come from a book, right? Like, I completely understand that and believe that. And I guess I want to also make sure that we're putting fair and equitable requirements in for everyone, not, regardless of what you're diagnosed with or what we're trying to treat, right? Like that there's that same level.
I think it's
I struggle with that. I guess
Yeah.
I struggle with that.
Yeah, it's unique to the SUD world simply because we have two systems in the country to become qualified, and one doesn't require formal academic educational process. They require more continuing education and training process. One's kind of more that tech side model, and one's the academic side. And Kansas does academic, and 3/4 of the other rest of the states do the other one. So it's trying to open that door for those that have gotten probably close to equivalent knowledge base with experience, but haven't gone through the training. But again, every state is very different. I mean, when you look at Colorado's AD, their certification for addiction counselors, they do have to do X number of hours. It's relatively robust, and it's week-long kinds of training and that kind of stuff. Whereas Missouri's is not that kind of model. So it just varies so drastically, and they depend upon, I think, the test and time served in the profession, and then supervisory approval kind of stuff for the Missouri license. That's my understanding of it. Obviously, I'm not, or the certification. I'm not expert on their stuff in any way, stretch, or thing. But
Can we,
I would agree with that, Mike. There's a lot of when I've looked at other states, some of the states that don't have the degree or even formal, training in a university, they have classes they have to take, but it's not formal classes like we require. But they do, even for the lower levels, require hours of practice and supervised practice before they can become fully licensed.
mm-hmm.
do we assume that we would be getting a lot of reciprocity cases from Missouri more than other
During
states?
that too.
Then what if we just looked at Missouri's licensing requirements? Like, I don't know if I'm trying to make it too simple, but I would think that the safety side of it would be paramount, right? Like background checks, etc., for people that are wanting to come into the state. But then for the education side of it, maybe we just consider what Missouri has and we fall somewhere in the middle. I don't know. I'm trying to think like Christina and just like, we don't want to be restrictive. We are in a workforce crisis. So safety would be, to me, number one, really over education. When I think about effective peers that I've seen do work, I would think safety and some kind of recent references And then we look at what Missouri's doing with their education requirements and we try to, land somewhere.
So Leslie, do you have a sense of, I mean, I'm guessing Missouri's number one for the ones that are looking to try to get licensed here, but do the other surrounding states have any kind of robustness as far as folks coming this direction?
So Colorado, we get a lot of people from Colorado.
Okay.
Some from Nebraska. Oklahoma requires bachelor's degree or master's, so it's not there's not a problem there.
Okay.
They don't require as much coursework, specific addiction coursework. They don't require as many hours as Kansas, but they do require the degree. I don't know, and maybe would it be helpful if we had someone on staff maybe look at the requirements for the surrounding states and bring them back to the committee?
I think
Email
that
that to the committee.
helpful.
Yeah, I think it
They're
would be
very
really,
different.
yeah, I was gonna say, I know I've looked at all three of them, but it's been a while. On Missouri's the one I'm most familiar with being here in KC, but we will have, it'll be challenging to find a middle ground, Lisa.
I think so.
Because the formal education component, like I said, I know when you look at Colorado, they have, I don't remember the number of continuing ed they have to have, but they have quite a bit. Missouri's is, I think, 3 to 6 hours of ethics and then training time and a supervision plan. They don't really have a lot of additional educational requirements. So there's a lot of variation, but they do have to pass the ICRC test.
So another question I have then also with all of this, I mean, I agree, Leslie, yes, that would be super helpful to know kind of what the other states are doing. The other question I have is if there is some sort of, like Lisa, like you were saying, like kind of a rubric, I guess in my mind, that's how I kind of think of it, a rubric of you got to have this and this and this and this. Does that become an administrative burden, or is that something that the BSRB could absorb or be able to evaluate? I don't know how many of these that are you get, but is that something that's feasible? If there was something like that, that's a little more, seems like me would take a little more hours to kind of look at each of those components.
Yeah, I just asked Pat Stylen this same question several months ago. Is there anywhere in the world an existing crosswalk of all those requirements? And the answer is no. She did not know of any, and it is going to cost money to do the work to pull that stuff together.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's helpful to know, Lisa. I think my question is for the BSRB, like for Leslie and David, the question being, is it feasible? I mean, how complex of a rubric could we have in Kansas to say, okay, you got to have this. I mean, we're talking about a lot of different things here, and to me, that's more time to evaluate all of those things to make a determination. Is that feasible?
And Leslie probably has a little bit more experience looking at some of those. We do have conversations from time to time in terms of talking about scope of practice and different licensure requirements in some surrounding states, especially. But Leslie, do you want to weigh in on that one, maybe?
I don't, I guess it would really depend on what you meant, like what we were searching for. It would obviously make it more difficult. Like now, reciprocity is just, if you have a bachelor's degree, you don't have to show that you have the coursework as long as you have a bachelor's degree. And that actually let a lot of people in that were struggling to get in before. So I think we've lowered it to a point. And I think we'd really have to look at what you would want included in the rubric to really, make an educated guess. Something else that, the states are all very different, but like Colorado has a license, but they have also kind of technicians and things, they're certified and technicians instead of licensure. And maybe that's where, Kansas is just so different. Maybe that's what you could look at, having some kind of lower level rather than bringing in people without education to an LAC. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Leslie. And I also think about how, like, again, scope of practice and roles. I mean, Lisa, you mentioned earlier, like peers, like that is such an important piece of a comprehensive plan or of treatment. To me, sometimes this isn't an issue of being able to license additional people. Maybe it's about, which isn't our purview here, but increasing the salaries and the positions and of those individuals that are providing that piece of care, which is so crucial, requires that lived experience, versus saying you need to do a different role. I mean, I don't, is that making sense? Like, I just think that sometimes these.
Yeah, we have that discussion all the time through Mid-America ATTC about developing that workforce and getting people interested in the career. And for some people, getting them interested, the pathway may be that they are a peer and they should be able to earn a living doing that. I mean, people
Yes,
don't want
I
to
would
come
agree
into
that
our field.
people what? I'm sorry.
People aren't flocking in droves to become addiction counselors. It's always been that way. We don't make
Right.
anything.
Right. It's not just the requirements that are keeping people away.
So being mindful of time, and this has been a great discussion, I heard that folks would like the requirements, like to be able to see the requirements for Missouri and Colorado. Did I understand that correctly?
Nebraska and Oklahoma, I think that just, again, all those neighboring states. It sounds
Yeah,
like
the
there's
neighboring states.
Neighboring states,
Yeah.
okay. Is that, David, is that something, who would do that?
I
Mhm.
think I can reasonably say that Leslie and I can pull some of that information.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then bring it
I was
back.
going to say, yeah, that'd probably be me or Dave.
Okay, I appreciate
because
that.
we know what we're looking for.
Okay, and then can we add this to continuing discussion for the next meeting?
Mhm.
Okay, all
Yep.
right. Is everybody good with moving on at this point? All right, thank you very much for the conversation. Moving on to new business. I am going to have David speak to this a little bit more, as it is unique language that was found in one of the Kansas statutes. And David has agreed to explain it further.
Yes. So from time to time, certain topics do come up. There's a separate set of statutes and a separate set of regulations for each profession, and lots of different sections of those. And sometimes the language, when it was originally put in, there may have been some intention behind certain words. Sometimes things get carried over based on something in particular. But recently, there was some language that came to light, and it posed some questions for us. And in reviewing sort of our material, it does not appear that this language had been reviewed or commented on, at least recently, from the board. And so we wanted to kind of bring it to you to get your thoughts on this language. And I'll share my screen here. I'll pull up a copy of this statute. This is KSA 65-66. It's the construction of act for the addiction counseling license. And it basically says, nothing in the Addiction Counselor Licensure Act shall be construed to prevent addiction counseling practice by students or interns or individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling to practice under qualified supervision of a professional recognized and approved by the board in an educational institution or agency, so long as they are designated by titles such as student, trainee, intern, or other titles clearly indicating training status. And there's some other different carve-outs here as well in this statute. But what came to light recently, it's very clear in our minds when someone is a student, when someone is an intern, but that phrase, individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling, we don't have a whole lot of context for that phrase. And for individuals, wanting to assert that, they meet the other requirements here, in general, I would say, as a public protection standpoint, individuals providing services, we would want to make sure they're either licensed to provide those services or that there is something specifically in statute referencing those individuals authority to provide the services. And here, it just seemed to be a phrase that we were not especially familiar with, and thought that perhaps we would bring it to the advisory committee to see if you could add any context, if any of you are familiar from when this was put in. This statute in particular has not been modified since 2016. So it's been a full 8 years since the last time there were any changes to this. But wanted to get your thoughts and comments specifically on the phrase about individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling, and see if you could add any context or if you have any thoughts on whether that is something that is helpful to remain in here, that maybe we could more clearly define what we mean when we say preparing for the practice of addiction counseling, perhaps in a regulation, or if this is maybe something that's not necessary and maybe in the future the board could, ask to remove this language from the statute if it's unclear and not serving a purpose. So any of you have any comments on that?
Do we think this language originally not necessarily added in 2016, right? That phrase was there originally?
I'm not certain. The original language for the statute was brought in 2010, and then
Okay.
it looks like it was modified in 2011, and then in 2016,
Okay, so it's potentially could have been there since 2010.
possibly. Yeah.
Okay.
And Leslie, I tried to summarize basically our conversation. This was originally something that came up when Leslie was reviewing some information, and we had an internal discussion, and then went ahead and kind of thought it would be appropriate to bring to the board. So we did mention at the last board meeting, but said this is something that we would like to refer to the advisory committee for addiction counseling to have a discussion on this, and then get some thoughts and see what you all thought about this.
So David, I'm racking my brain. I can't think of what else that would mean. I think intern kind of is a more general term that would encompass, I guess, I don't know. I can't think of another example or situation that would.
Yeah, I mean, they would still have to meet the other requirements in that section.
Right.
To be an educational institution or agency designated by a title, either student, trainee, or intern. But we would not want someone to use this inappropriately. And I think the way most of this language is phrased tends to be in sort of an educational type setting. But we don't have a lot of background on this phrase, if this was something that was just modeled after an existing phrase from another state potentially, or if there was actual intention behind this, but I want to bring it to you.
So is the question whether it would just that this could be stricken from?
Well, I guess there's kind of a couple paths.
Okay.
If there is some context behind this phrase, individuals preparing for the contest of practice of addiction counseling, it would be helpful for us to maybe add a definition in regulation that gave more clarity in terms of what we mean when we say individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling. So that way it's more clear what individuals would fall under this statute. But if it's not helpful and it just provides some vagueness or lack of clarity, then perhaps there would be a recommendation to just remove this if the rest of it is helpful when it talks about things like students or interns.
I also cannot think of who this would be at all. And I wonder about the first line has students or interns, but then as you follow down the paragraph, it has student, trainee, and intern. And does that trainee, which I think that's appropriate, but then does that further muddy the definition of what a student or an intern is, or is it possible to strike individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling and just replace it with trainee to follow suit with the rest of the sentence? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
The word trainee, though, is not I mean, it still
Big.
doesn't specify they have to be a student. Like in the other professions, it says that students are exempt. But trainee could be anyone who has a degree but hasn't applied for a license. You know what I mean?
Okay, so potentially is trainee a difficulty too?
It could be, yes.
Is this same language in other licensure statutes of other professions?
No, they talk about students or people completing their like practicum students or internship students, but they don't have people preparing for the practice of that profession.
I'm sorry, Leslie, I didn't mean to talk over you. I'm wondering, I'm thinking clear back to like 2001 when I had graduated and I had my master's in social work, but I was training to be an addictions counselor. Like there was that the coursework and all the things that used to be in place. And so I think of that in that instance, maybe that I would have fallen into that individual preparing for the practice of addiction counseling, possibly in the past. But the way that we've shifted, I guess I'm wondering if that needs to be like that maybe doesn't need to be there.
Now that you say that, I agree. In 2004 or 2006, I was one of those people. I held a social work license, but I was working on becoming an addictions counselor. But I wasn't a student or an intern anymore. But like you said, now the licensure has shifted under the BSRB umbrella. So maybe it's no longer applicable.
So I'm trying to think again under a current, if someone comes in and even because if they have a temporary, that would be designated as temporary, that wouldn't even fall under this.
Right.
Again, if they're coming into the state and they're trying to get licensed, they would be practicing yet, right? Like there's not can anybody think of a time when there would be an individual preparing for the practice, but not be either licensed under temporary status or student or intern? I
can't think of any particular place. The only place that I could see that potentially coming would be from our previous conversation about the reciprocity. If there's a time frame there that they have to have specific training supervision in Kansas before it's a full license kind of thing. It's the only place I could see it, that I've seen it in other states. They've done it that way.
And that hasn't occurred. So,
right.
David, it sounds like we're unable to provide more clarity about who this would be under the current licensure regulations. So can we recommend that this be removed at some time?
Yeah, you could. I think what I would recommend now, just based on especially some of the earlier comments, I probably should have done a little bit more homework on this one myself, because there was a good question if this was in the original statute or if this is something that was added later. So maybe if we want to table this, I can try to pull some of the legislative history and look back to the 2010 version to see if this was some of the original language, or if it wasn't. If there was a reason that it was added in 2011, maybe I can find maybe some testimony why somebody said, no, we should include this additional term. I don't know if that's the truth, but if it is something that occurred, I want to make sure to bring it back to you before you would vote on it. So
okay.
If you don't mind.
That sounds great. Okay. If everyone is in agreement with that, that sounds great. Yep. Okay. Moving on to the next item on new business, advisory committee membership. I know that there are, Jason Hess has maxed his time being an advisory committee member. So he's transitioning off of the advisory committee. And there are several people that have, well, at least a couple that I'm aware of, David can speak to this more, that have re-upped to be on the advisory committee again as their terms are turning over. But David, could you give a little bit more background on how many people have to be the minimum and the maximum number of advisory committee members, and if we want to recruit new advisory committee members?
Sure. Yes. So for the advisory committees, the advisory committee policy says that the membership will be made up of the board member for that profession, a public board member, and then the other individuals serving on that committee will be no fewer than 3 and no more than 10 non-board members. And there's some language in the advisory committee policy concerning individuals who could serve in that capacity as a non-board member on the advisory committee. Generally, those are licensed professionals in the profession. They do talk about some interest in having a variety between the different license levels, geographic representation across the state, individuals maybe in the private practice or education or doing public service. So there's some information about that, but yes, Jill, you're correct. Jason Hess is ending his 4th term. So that will end at the end of June. So at that time, he'll have to come after out of the advisory committee. And there were 2 other members who had a term that would be expiring at the end of June, and they have requested to be reappointed to the advisory committee. So officially, the chair of the board has the authority to make those reappointments, but I anticipate that will occur prior to the end of the fiscal year. So with that, there's after July 1st, it's looking like we would have 7 non-board members on the advisory committee. So that means you definitely have above the minimum of 3. So you're in good shape there. You could add as many as 3 people if you wanted to do that. You could add as few as 0. Now, right now, with the current makeup of the advisory committee, with it being 10 members, even odd numbers provides a little bit more help in terms of quorum sometimes. So I would probably say, you could maybe add 1 or add 3, but you don't have to make that decision today. If you were thinking of maybe extending an invitation for individuals to join the advisory committee, what has traditionally been done in the past is the advisory committees request that I send a message out to all licensees with information about the advisory committee. I usually copy or attach a copy of the advisory committee policy in that, so they understand the role the advisory committee has as far as recommending changes to the board, considering items the board has referred to the advisory committee for discussion. And then we basically give a length of time, usually about a week to 10 days, for individuals to self-nominate themselves for advisory committee consideration. And they do that by submitting a letter of interest and then also a copy of a resume. And then I collect all of that. When the time period closes, I distribute that to the members of the advisory committee. You can review that, and then you would need to have discussion at a public meeting for those individual candidates, perhaps say who stood out the most to you that you think would make a good member of the advisory committee. And then you would publicly vote on certain individuals to recommend the chair of the board as. And then I would draft a letter on your behalf, submit that to the chair of the board, and then she could review that, request additional information, or ultimately appoint people to the advisory committee. So I guess your question today is, if you would like me to extend that invitation to licensees, I'm happy to do that. Generally, I would just put together a message, email that out, and then, like I said, give about a week to 10 days for individuals to self-nominate themselves for consideration to join the advisory committee, unless you would like me to do something different.
I am in support of that, of adding more voices, more professionals, more experience to the advisory committee, but I'd really like to hear from other people present about your opinions.
I think the more voices, the better. And I do think something we've maybe, I don't know if we've talked about it or not. We don't have a lot of diversity in this group. And so maybe, I don't know if that can be something that is considered in the solicitation or, saying that we really highly encourage individuals from diverse backgrounds to apply, that we really need voices at the table. Yeah.
I think it's important, especially when we talk about, looking at standardized exams and biases for
Yeah.
particular populations. I think that's important.
Agreed.
Yeah, I
David?
agree with that. What's the current makeup geographic wise as far as the spread? Do we have a decent representation from the West? And then do we have any folks that are straight LACs, or are we all master's level folks that are,
I'm just an LAC.
okay.
I
didn't
wouldn't
mean
say
just
I
LAC.
wouldn't say
would say
just,
just.
Chad.
I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to say it that way.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I'm looking at the board. It looks like we have Lawrence, Topeka. I'm listed as Gelmar. I've actually moved to Dodge, but still Western Kansas. Lawrence, Derby, Kansas City, Sedan, Wichita, Topeka is listed. I don't know if these are all the members that are still. So very heavy Eastern, I would say. If we could get some more Western Kansas or even Central, that'd be awesome. We have Chad and Wichita or Derby. I'm not sure where Sedan is. Where's Sedan?
I'm not sure.
It's southeast, I think. I don't remember.
Yeah, it's southeast.
Okay.
Southeast. Okay.
So in terms of diversity among members of the advisory committee, generally, if I send out the message, there's a certain phrase that advisory committees have requested that I add recently. And so the advisory committee policy does talk about some different factors to look at when evaluating members. The phrase I include in that message now is, when considering applicants, the advisory committee members will work to ensure there is diverse representation on the advisory committee, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. And that's kind of some of the direct language from the advisory committee policy. So I could use that language unless you want me to say something different.
Could use that language, and I think also just I mean, I'm thinking personally, I may be making those efforts to reach out to individuals that maybe would be good candidates to just personally have those invites. That maybe we could all think of that, and keeping those things in mind, maybe.
And I will say this too. I know that we ask advisory committee members and board members to be cautious and conscious of possible conflicts of interest. And so in this situation, if you feel like you can't be fair to candidates, that's a decision that you can make for yourself, for sure. But given the nature of these communities, it's not uncommon for people to be familiar, especially with different people that apply for the advisory committee. Just because you know someone, that doesn't mean you need to disqualify yourself from discussing that person or even advocating for their behalf if you think they are the one that stands out the most for the advisory committee. And if that message is sent out, definitely if you want to contact individual licensees that you think would be good applicants to apply for the advisory committee, that's fine too. So I just that comes up from time to time occasionally when we're discussing candidates and someone says, well, I know this person. And then there's a little bit of awkwardness in the conversation sometimes where they say, do I need to recuse myself? And it's like, no, in this situation, it's always up to you. If you want to recuse yourself from the vote, you always have that option. But just because you know people that may have expressed interest in it, you don't have to recuse yourself. It might be helpful in actually evaluating the candidates in this case.
Okay. So go ahead,
just really,
Christina, sorry.
Just not. So David, another thing that I think plays in this as far as geography is, my guess is that our plan is to continue to meet via Zoom. Is that the intent of this committee and in the future? Because I do think that matters when people are considering being on this for, the amount of years and having to make a trip to Topeka. And if you live in Western Kansas, that's a big deal. So is that also kind of what we can relate and highlight maybe in the message? I think that might be important.
I hadn't considered that. That's important.
Yeah, generally, most of the advisory committees right now, unless they make an exception, those meetings are all held remotely. And the language in the message that I have used recently does say, currently advisory committees meet for 2-hour meetings every other month. Advisory committee meetings are held remotely over Zoom, or at the BSRB office in Topeka. But I could add a note in there that they're generally held remotely over Zoom, or if an in-person meeting occurs, it would be by hybrid. So there would still be an option to attend remotely or something like that.
And we're meeting quarterly right now.
Correct. So for yours, I'd want to say that it would meet quarterly as opposed to the 2 months.
Sure. It sounds like we're in agreement for David to extend an invitation to practitioners across the state.
Do we have to have a motion for that? I would motion
Yeah,
that we
do
do
we
that,
have
and
to-
and
we
I
have
would
to have
say
a
the
motion for that?
3 if we are going to do to go for 3 positions. I think that would be great.
Well, and you don't have to make that decision today. You can just say we're going to open it up and see how many people express interest. And then when you're reviewing candidates, you can make that decision as you review candidates if you want to.
So do we need to have a motion or a vote on that?
You don't need to.
Okay.
I can just move forward on that if it seems like
Okay,
that's from the advisory committee.
that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, item C on new business, and again, I'm going to ask for David's assistance on this item, update on student and maybe Leslie's as well, update on student temporary addiction counseling licenses.
Great. Well, this is an item that was, just to give a little context, it was passed by the legislature last year. It was something that started with advisory committee discussions, and then was ultimately brought to the board. And then the board modified the proposal that was brought to it on this. But it is our first student temporary type of license for addiction counseling. And since that was passed, we were able to start moving forward considering individuals for that as of I believe either July or August of last year. We tried to move forward on it as quickly as we could. Even put forward a temporary regulation to address the fee topic so we wouldn't have to have any delays there as well. And currently, I just went ahead and looked at the numbers for that. Thought I'd let you know there are 16 temporary student licensed addiction counselors. There are 13 other individuals that are in the process of applying for consideration for that. And then there is one other individual that previously held a student addiction counseling license that is now obsolete. And that is because they have now graduated and they have an LAC. So it's been very, very popular from what I have seen in terms of the numbers. Individuals have asked certain questions that we've had to flesh out in terms of meeting the educational requirements for this. And that has been a good discussion. And I did want to kind of open up that doorway a little bit. And Leslie, if you are able to kind of comment a little bit, initially we kind of had it focused. And if you look through the language of the statute, it talks about 60 hours in addiction counseling or related fields. And there's some other requirements individuals have to meet as well. There was one of the major questions that we have kind of worked through is if individuals pursue, let's say, a licensed bachelor social worker, LBSW license, if they obtain that license, they're able to use that license to fulfill the educational requirements to test for the LAC. And so there was kind of a question of, well, is pursuing classes towards an LBSW, would that be sufficient to meet the educational requirements for this student LAC as well? And so as long as that does line up correctly, that is something that we're able to consider for applicants when they're trying to obtain this student addiction counselor license. And Leslie, do you want to comment on that item?
No, that was something we took to the board, and the board voted to allow people pursuing another license to also get the student temporary if they were wanting to focus on addiction counseling.
Mm-hmm.
So that's opened it up some.
It has. And Leslie, would you say, because you spend more time speaking directly to the licensing staff who review these types of applications, is it your impression too this has been kind of a popular type item that individuals have been asking about and applying for?
Yeah, I believe so. We've had a lot of questions about it. So yeah, I think it's popular. It's gaining more site. People are seeing that the option is there more now.
And I think some people had requested this as sort of an effort to address workforce and kind of a pipeline to get people into the profession. And, you know, it's still really early. These were initially set up to last for 2 years, and they could be extended for an additional 2 years if that's necessary. But I think at least the early results are that this has been very popular and very well received. So just wanted to communicate that back to you. And then, yeah, the original proposal that was brought to the board did include another variation, and that had to do with a student addiction counseling temporary license, but more at the graduate level. And so I have heard some additional conversation about that item as well. So, so if the advisory committee wanted to have more conversation on that topic later this year, that would be okay too. But I just wanted to kind of separate the two items out. For the student temporary LAC, that has been implemented and well received, and that's where we currently stand.
And the other proposal that was brought to the committee and maybe the board of a more master's level student temporary license is something that I would request that we add to the agenda for June, because I've had some emails from some professionals or a professional across the state asking about that. And I feel like I need more information before I can speak to it. And then want to get the background of when that was first discussed and proposed. It sounds like we have a couple of agenda items that have been tabled pending getting more information. Are there other topics, future topics for our meeting in June or even beyond?
And I'll go ahead and mention a couple of them that some of the other advisory committees might be discussing that your advisory committee could look at as well. I did mention earlier that we did a survey for the social work advisory committee, and we pulled all members of that profession and asked them questions about things like the multi-state compact, the examination for licensure, continuing education, supervision, and we collected some really good data and responses from those individuals. And so that's been really helpful. We put together about a 62-page report, and I included a copy of that report, that's posted on our website. So you can review that report if you would like. But basically, what we did is we signed up for an account to be able to survey up to 15,000 people this year. And so that basically allows us the ability to survey all permanent licensees of the BSRB if the advisory committees would like to do a survey for members of their profession this year. So just something to be thinking about in the future if you want to have a discussion about, you know, with other topics where you would find it valuable to collect some information or feedback from licensees on any of those topics that I mentioned, or maybe others. So that's something that you could work on developing questions. The way the social work advisory committee developed that is essentially they had a conversation at a meeting where they talked about topics that they thought would be helpful to get feedback on, and some preliminary, not fully fleshed out questions, but maybe some topics and some things they desired to find out. And then I drafted some questions for them to consider. And then they met a second time and then looked at those draft questions and modified them further to really go after the information that they were seeking. And then once we had that built, then we put it out for all the social work licensees, and it was open for, I want to say, about 10 days. And we were able to send reminders to individuals who had not completed it on the first go around, but that was sent out to 8,200 and about 90 people. And we got responses back from almost 2,800 people. So really good response rate for a survey of that kind. That wasn't mandatory, it was totally optional. So, but like I said, the information we got back was really, really helpful. So if you would like to do that in the future, that's an item to consider. Additionally, I mentioned the board was starting a conversation on jurisprudence examinations. If you want to have a conversation about that in the future, if you think that would be helpful for your profession, either people coming from out of state or people when they're initially getting licensed, just to some of the benefits I can see. We do have some individuals that occasionally will renew their license prior to completing their continuing education hours. And there may be some confusion where they think, well, I had a couple weeks left in my license time period, and so I was going to just make up the hours during that. Well, when you renew your license, you have to do an attestation that says, at the time I'm renewing, all my hours have been completed. So there's just certain things like that that are a nice reminder to people. As much as possible, we want to make sure that people can avoid any issues by being proactive and helping people understand the rules. But then there's also some specific things about title protection that people may not be aware of, and we want to make sure that we're enforcing those good things as well. So having a conversation about jurisprudence and maybe how that could be implemented in a way that would be helpful, because it's something you could talk about. And like I said before, well, kind of what we talked about, these licensed student temporary licenses, the temporary student licenses may be more of a conversation as far as that, if you want to develop that any further or not. So that's what I had down at some initial starting spot.
I'd like to continue the conversation on the student license at a graduate level. Does anyone else have thoughts about future topics?
Dave, one thing I thought that we were going to also do for addiction counseling was go over the program requirements in the education regulation. We went over the coursework last time, but we haven't really delved into the program requirements and going over maybe some of those things holding people back from licensure that were, important 10 years ago, but maybe not so much now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea. A lot of other professions are looking at their educational requirements for licensure regulation and considering what we say specifically programs have to have to meet those requirements, because it does put the board in a position that if those are a requirement, if someone comes from a program that doesn't have those, the board is put in a position generally where they'd have to deny licensure for that reason. So,
we also add that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anything else for today?
That's all that I had.
Okay. If nobody has any future topics, our next meeting is in June. David, would you be willing to send out a poll for a meeting date?
Absolutely.
Okay. Any final comments by anybody present? Okay. Thank you all today very much for your time and your knowledge, of course. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 Hi.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.